Hey folks, back with another video. Let's dive into what stories got my attention today. Starting with Ethiopia, a massive change in the conflict. After more than 3 weeks of war, Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has claimed victory in his military campaign against Tigray's ruling party, the Tigray People's Liberation Front. The Ethiopian government launched a manhunt on Sunday for leaders of a rebellious faction in the northern region of Tigray after announcing federal troops had taken over the regional capital and military operations were complete. He said on Saturday evening federal troops had taken control of the Tigrayan capital Mekelle within hours of launching an offensive there, laying to rest fears of protracted fighting in the city of 500,000 people. The Prime Minister, who refers to the 3-week-old conflict as an internal law and order matter, has rebuffed international offers of mediation, and federal police will try to arrest TPLF quote-unquote criminals and bring them to court. The police late on Saturday issued arrest warrants for 17 more military officers charged with crimes in connection with the conflict that include treason and embezzlement of public properties, state-affiliated Fana TV reported. They add to the 117 warrants issued for senior military officers it says are connected to TPLF since the conflict broke out. Now, it was not clear if any TPLF leaders had surrendered, their whereabouts, or their next plans. Nearly 44,000 people have reportedly fled the conflict area, mostly to Sudan. Ethiopia and its neighbor Eritrea have had a long and troubled history of conflict, but today Eritrea's Isaias and Ethiopia's Abiy stand together in fighting the TPLF. Until the early 1990s, the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, a secessionist movement in which Isaias co-founded, and the TPLF were allies in the struggle against Ethiopia's military government. That government was overthrown in 1991. 2 years later, Eritrea gained independence. The TPLF, meanwhile, became the leading force in the ruling coalition that dominated Ethiopian politics for nearly 3 decades before Abiy came to power in 2018. But in 1998, the two countries went to war over territorial, economic, and political disputes. Tens of thousands of people had died in that conflict. After a peace agreement in 2000, Eritrea and Ethiopia remained in a state of armed standoff for nearly 18 years, which ended after Abiy from the Oromo Democratic Party became prime minister. William Davison, a senior analyst for Ethiopia at the International Crisis Group, stressed that the relationship between Eritrea and Tigray is still bad and that has ramifications for Ethiopian-Eritrean ties to this day. Quote, Tigray and the TPLF leadership are seen as the main obstacle to improve relations between Ethiopia and Eritrea from the perspective of the leadership in those countries, and also in their vision, the Tigrayan leadership is seen as a threat to broader regional stability, end quote, he told DW. Davison explained that there is an advantage to Ethiopia allying with its neighbor in the crisis. Quote, Tigray has a long border with Eritrea, so to assist the Ethiopian federal government campaign to remove Tigray's government, it made sense to use Eritrea at least for logistical support, end quote, he said. In the long run, Abiy and Isaias have the same objective, which motivates them to work together after years of conflict between their countries, Tronovol said, adding, quote, Abiy needs Isaias' backing to further marginalize the TPLF from power, end quote. Eritrea is willing to offer its own soldier as quote-unquote cannon fodder to defeat the Tigrayan forces in the war, Tronovol said. As a result, Wrong does not believe the conflict in Tigray will be resolved anytime soon. In her view, the new relationship between Ethiopia and Eritrea is simply a quote-unquote temporary alliance with a common goal. Meanwhile, the TPLF leader Debretsion Gebremichael told Reuters in a text message on Saturday evening that TPLF forces would fight on, raising the prospect that the conflict could drag on. The TPLF has a history of guerrilla resistance. Tigray's mountainous terrain and borders with Sudan and Eritrea helped the TPLF during its long struggle against the Marxist dictator Mengistu Haile Mariam, whom it eventually toppled in 1991. Officially, the first phase of the war is over. However, the more difficult part of the whole conflict has now started. So far, TPLF has not been able to spread the conflict into the wider region, and that is, I believe, due to the fact that the Ethiopian and Eritrean government had coordinated the war, plus the war has now come to an end with the capture of Mekele, named within 3 weeks. A short war, indeed, in my opinion. Now, this was something I did not expect to happen this soon. I did not expect the city of Mekele to basically be captured by the government this quickly. But I'm happy to be corrected in this matter. However, I do believe the government has got a more difficult job of trying to contain any blowback and not to overreact to a provocation by TPLF. And hopefully Abe's government can rule with peace and bring in peace to the region. And along with that, justice and economic activity that would alleviate, let's just say, a large part of the current problem the region is facing. Moving on into Nigeria, militants there killed at least 70 farm workers in rice fields near the northeastern Nigerian city of Maiduguri, on Saturday, news agencies and Nigerian media reported. The attack, which injured 6 other people, took place in the village of Koshobe in Nigeria's restive Borno state. A local anti-jihadist militia told news agency AFP that the fighters tied up farm workers and slit their throats. Although no group has yet claimed responsibility for the attack, the local anti-jihadist militia said Boko Haram was likely behind the killings. The workers were from the Sokoto state in northwestern Nigeria and had traveled roughly 1,000 kilometers to the northeast to find work, another militia member, Ibrahim Liman, told AFP. 8 others were missing and are presumed to have been kidnapped by the militias, Liman added. The incident comes a month after Boko Haram fighters killed 22 farmers working on their irrigation fields near Maiduguri in 2 separate incidents, accusing them of spying and passing information to the military and the local militia. Saturday's attack took place as people voted in local elections in Borno state. The elections had been postponed repeatedly because of the increasing attacks. Villages in northeast Nigeria's Borno state on Sunday buried 43 farmers while security forces searched for dozens of people who were still missing. One resident and Amnesty International said 10 women were among those missing. Now, Boko Haram, in my opinion, is getting desperate and I think it is lashing out. But I hope that the government gets the needed moral push, let's just say a mandate, moral kind of a mandate, and that they conduct a proper counterattack to the terrorists, which I believe should be a combination of financially and intellectually bankrupting the Islamist threat. You cannot, this war cannot continue on just militarily. It has to be now primarily fought with the financial and intellectual side as well being involved in this. Moving on into Afghanistan, a suicide car bomber struck an army base in Afghanistan on Saturday, killing at least 30 security personnel, officials said, in one of the bloodiest attacks targeting government forces in recent months. The attack occurred on the outskirts of Ghazni city, capital of the eastern province of Ghazni, which has seen regular fighting between the Taliban and government forces. Quote, 30 bodies and 24 wounded people have been brought to hospital. All of them are security personnel, end quote. Baz Muhammad Hemmat, director of Ghazni Hospital, told AFP. Interior Ministry spokesman Tariq Aryan said its suicide bomber had detonated a vehicle full of explosives. Video footages showed military ambulances taking the dead and wounded to hospitals and cranes deployed to remove the debris from the site of the attack in the base. The Ministry of the Defense gave a toll of 10 security personnel killed and 7 wounded. The ministry is of course known to downplay tolls in attacks against its forces. No group has so far claimed the attack, and the Taliban, who are fighting government forces largely in rural areas, have often not commented on deadly strikes since the peace talks commenced in September. The Ghazni attack comes just days after 2 bombs killed 14 people in the historic city of Bamiyan, ending years of calm in the isolated town famous for its ancient Buddhist heritage. In another suicide car bomb attack on Saturday, 1 civilian was killed and 20 others wounded in the southern city of Kalat in the province of Zabul, Provincial Police Chief Hikmatullah Kochi told AFP. Sunday's bombings marked the latest carnage in Afghanistan, where violence has surged since the start of peace talks on September 12 in Doha. The Pentagon said earlier this month that it would soon pull out some 2,000 troops from Afghanistan, speeding up the timeline of a full withdrawal by May 2021, as agreed with Taliban in a separate deal signed in February. Now, as with the last story that I covered, I would also push for the Afghan government to not overreact but rather act smart by working to bankrupting the Islamist ideology of this supposed moral high ground that they push on to other people, combined with the counter-intellectual narrative that they need to build against terrorism as a tool. Moving on into Yemen, where clashes between southern Yemeni separatists and pro-government forces in Yemen's Abyan province killed 13 fighters, according to military sources. The infighting late on Friday between the nominal allies in the civil war against the Houthi rebels killed at least 8 men from the separatist Southern Transitional Council, including 2 officers and 5 from Yemeni government side, military sources from both sides told AFP. The STC withdrew from talks over a power-sharing deal with the Saudi-backed government of Abdurabu Mansour Hadi in August. It has been allied with Saudi coalition against the Houthis, but it also wants secession of southern Yemen. A deal struck in Riyadh in November 2019 was designed to mend the rift between allies. Tens of thousands of people, mostly civilians, have been killed and millions displaced in Yemen's conflict, which has triggered what the United Nations has called the world's worst humanitarian disaster. Now, in my opinion, Yemen shows both the folly of regime change and regime maintaining from the outside forces. I believe they both fail as they continue. The Saudi government's action in Yemen will continue to fail as it is a failed policy. And in this conflict, Yemeni fault lines are also coming out of the surface. Now, the quicker Mohammed bin Salman gets out of this quagmire, the better it is for him, as he will be able to free up resources that he can then use to address the domestic issues. But Yemen has turned into Saudi Arabia's what the economists call the sunk cost fallacy. I believe Mohammed bin Salman wants a victory at any cost, and a victory at any cost, in my opinion, is always going to be more expensive than a failure at the current cost. Cut your losses while you still are somewhat ahead in the game. Moving on into our weekend protests that take place in Belarus. Thousands of people joined renewed protests in Belarus on Sunday against President Alexander Lukashenko. Now, in the capital Minsk, demonstrators gathered in residential areas and then joined into larger protest marches. Many wore the historic white, red, and white flags. The Vyasna human rights body published an initial list of 20 people who had been detained. Videos shared on the messaging service Telegram showed officials. Sorry, let me read that again. Videos shared on the messaging service Telegram showed protesters being dragged into minibuses by masked security forces. Officials followed protesters into the courtyards of residential complexes and used tear gas against protesters, according to media reports. For weeks, security forces have sought to quash the opposition movement by detaining protesters and preventing them from gathering in central Minsk, where the biggest rallies, sometimes attracting hundreds of thousands of people, have taken place. On Sunday, the opposition appealed to its supporters to instead attend smaller gatherings in different districts of the capital. Similar protests calling for Lukashenko's resignation were held in other cities. Riot police were deployed to break up the protests and, as in previous weeks, authorities shut metro stations, blocked mobile phone coverage in an attempt to stop people from meeting. There were also reports of power cuts in some neighborhoods. Security forces cordoned off large areas of the city with metal bars. Belarusian news website the Tut.by reported that police were using stun grenades and tear gas while videos of masked officers dragging protesters into vans circulated on social media. Belarusian authorities arrested dozens of people taking part in anti-government protests in Minsk and other cities on Sunday. Now, human rights group Vyasna, uh, as of yet, has said that at least 100 people had been taken into custody. The European Union, which no longer recognizes President Alexander Lukashenko as legitimate. The opposition sees civil rights activist Svetlana Tikhanovskaya as the real winner. Western governments have condemned the recent election as neither free nor fair. Now, Lukashenko, an ally of Russia, has refused to resign and has instead offered to reform the constitution. Now, the whole situation in Belarus seems to be like a battle of wills between the protesters and the government, and so far neither side has budged from its initial position. And if this continues, I am at this moment thinking that President Alexander Lukashenko will prevail over the protesters until or unless something major happens. Anyway, that's it for this video. If you liked the video, then hit that like button and hit that subscribe button for future updates. Write in the comment sections your thoughts, criticism, and anything I might have missed. And I will see you in the next video.